Hello, my name is Patrick Wambold, and I'm a technical account manager here at Epic Games. Today we're going to talk about using Unreal Engine for television production. I'm going to go over some of the tools and techniques necessary to create motion graphics packages for television. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Alright, well I'm very excited to present this topic to everyone. Let's face it, television production is a massive industry and we can't cover everything. Today we're going to have a heavy focus on creating motion graphics packages. Unreal Engine in television is usually associated with virtual sets, AR content, and virtual production. However, every area of production is looking to optimize their workflow. Lots of people are turning to Unreal for increased quality, quicker render times, and Unreal has become a really robust tool for motion graphics creation. Here's a single rendered frame of the package we're going to dissect today. I'll show you how to create the text, the background, and basic elements of a motion graphics package. Key concepts that we're going to cover are media playback. We'll go over image sequence as well as video playback. 3D text and transform component. The transform component is brand new in 425 and is an easier way to animate 3D text inside the engine. We're going to go over some sequencer basics as far as how to work with media tracks and just some tips and tricks for working in linear content. Lastly, we're going to go over the movie render queue. This is brand new as well and offers some increased quality for anti-aliasing, motion blur, and also gives you the ability to work with high resolution files. As the name suggests, you can also batch queue renders now out of Unreal Engine. Before we hop over to the editor, let's talk a little bit about codec support. And first we'll talk about Apple ProRes. Apple ProRes is a plugin that needs to be enabled and all ProRes formats are supported. If using 4444, we support alpha channel and audio playback is also supported. Image sequence is enabled by default and is the best choice if you need frame-accurate playback when rendering out of the engine. Bump, PNG, JPEG, and EXR are supported, and you can also use proxy files for better performance inside the editor. HAP is a GPU-based codec that needs to be enabled for playback. We support alpha channel if using HAP alpha and HAP Q alpha, however audio is not supported at this time. Let's take a quick look at the parts required for media playback in Unreal. The first part is the media source. This is where you actually specify the media file to play back, whether it's an image sequence, a video file, or there are some other things like streaming media that could also be media sources. These will feed into a media player, which controls the playback as far as play, pause, stop, frame, number, etc. These are fed into a media texture, which is a special type of texture that handles media playback. And then this will be fed into a material, which can then be assigned to a mesh, a widget, or other things inside of the engine. Generally speaking, you will need each of these parts, but you don't need all 4 of them for every single video file. As I'll show you, we can kind of set this up in a variety of ways depending on what the goal is. Now that we're back in the editor, let's take a look at the final product. If I hit play, we can see there's a video playing on the back wall here. There's text that animates in. There's a little particle system, camera move, and more animated text coming in. So very simple 15-second motion graphics package. So let's investigate the video playback part first. As was described earlier, here are the assets that we need. We have our sources, player, texture, and lastly, material, which is applied to this curved screen here that I have. I'm going to go through these assets one by one so you can see a little bit better what are some of the options. So if we right click, media, and we'll go to image, and this is we'll call it source 1. Double click on that. In our sequence path, we'll pick what we want. So we'll go in the folder, pick the first image in the sequence, and then I'm going to set the frame rate since I know it's 30 FPS. The next thing that we need is our player. So when I go and add the player, it's going to ask if we want a media texture. We need one anyway, so I can hit OK. And I'm going to call this MP player 1. It automatically creates a texture. I'm going to rename this VT and open up the player. So now we can see the various sources that the player could play. We're using source 1, so if I double click it, I get this. I do have some options for play on open and loop, so I'm going to leave loop running and save that and leave this running so I can see the thumbnail actually animated down here. If I open that up, you can see it's referencing the media player. which is exactly what I want. The last component is a material. So we'll just add a regular material, m_, we'll call it source1. If I open the material, the only thing I actually need to make this work is a texture sample. So I add that in, I go down here and I pick the VT, hook that into the base color, and voila, we have media playback on our texture here. Something to note is that when you pick a media texture, it automatically changes the sample type to external. This is required for media textures. A regular texture sample defaults to color, so just something to keep in mind. Now, this is a regular default lit material. We could change it to unlit, there's no problem with that. However, if we're using alpha channel, we need to change it from opaque to translucent and hook the alpha into opacity. Otherwise, it won't be a translucent material and it won't be using alpha channel properly. If you're not using alpha channel, there's no reason to actually leave it as a translucent material, since translucent materials are less performant than just regular opaque materials. The last thing to note is if you wanted to use this in an editor utility widget, it has to be changed from surface to user interface. You would then just hook this up to final color and you would get the same thing here. So we'll save that. And those are the 4 pieces that you need for playback. As I said before, you can add as many sources as you want and just change them inside the player, either through code or in the sequencer. And you can reuse the same assets as far as textures and materials as long as you are only using one surface. If you have multiple surfaces, then yes, you need multiple players and multiple materials. So if you've looked through any of the documentation previously, you've probably noticed how to play video files programmatically. And you'll usually see something like this, where you'll have open source, which is referencing a media player, and a play node. That's really all that's required to have something play inside of like game mode. And if you wanted to use an editor utility widget, you just create the widget, add it to the viewport, and inside the widget itself, all you really need, this is an image that's referring to a material. And again, as long as it's in the UI domain, it will work just fine. So just as an example, I'm going to hook this up, compile, hit play, and it's going to play the video in the UI because we're using a widget down here. I'm going to disconnect that because we're not actually doing it, but I just wanted to show you an example that it's pretty simple to set up actually. So the next thing we'll kind of go over as far as playback is how to work with it on a sequencer track, because that's generally what you're going to be doing in this type of thing. So right now we have our media background, which is using this EXR file. So you'll notice that the playback in this, it scrubs along pretty nicely. You can jump around, it's pretty good. But I also have this same EXR or the same sequence rendered out as a JPEG or a PNG sequence. And you'll notice something quite different happens as it kind of has to fill in as it's going along. And the reason for this is JPEGs and PNGs are compressed, so they have to be decompressed upon playback. And so you will get a lot less fluid when you're scrubbing around using these. However, when you play them back and to be rendered, it'll be totally fine. But in general, EXRs just tend to be a little better for bouncing around inside. So to create these media tracks, all you really have to do, so I will delete this one and recreate it. So if we add a media track, go to media, we'll pick which one we want. So city scene EXR, it'll give me this little box here. I'm just gonna line it up the way that I had it previously. And then right now it's not doing anything in the background. So, and the reason for that is it's not actually assigned to anything by default. So you right click, go to properties, you tell it which media texture it is. I know that I was using T media text in this case. And so once I do that and I scrub now, I can actually see it playing in the background here when I scrub on the timeline. You can rearrange the order of them. You can control some other aspects of it as far as looping, whether or not it's active, and some other things from inside that menu as well. You can have multiple media tracks. There's no problem with that. I actually have a video playing here that has a transparent one that has a transparency. It's just a simple little particle thing that I was kind of playing around with. But just to show as an example, I didn't actually use it in the final product. So we can hide that and mute that. And that is most of the general stuff revolving around media playback inside the engine. A couple of things to maybe note. If you go into your project settings, there are a few options for media playback to maybe look at. In the IMG media option, you can set the default frame rate, how much to cache behind the playback position, how large your cache is going to be, lots of options. And also you can set the number of decoder threads as EXR is multi-threaded. In the WMF media, this will actually give you some other options as far as codecs for video playback. And then one other item to keep in mind is inside your image sequences. You don't get this option, but in your videos, you actually have a checkbox to pre-cache the file. This will cache the entire video for playback and should make it work much smoother than if it's trying to play it back if it's not pre-cached. Just some things to kind of work with, but in general, those are the main points as far as video playback with regard to Unreal and Sequencer. The next element here is the 3D text. So I'm going to try and go through this really quickly. So if I go to place actors and I type in 3D, I'll get this text 3D object and I can add it to the scene. I can change the text, so I'll change it to Unreal text, something like that, and it will update. My alignment is set to left, so I've put it to center, then I can kind of center it from the center of the text. I can apply different materials to different parts of the font, so I could really quickly go and do something like this on the floor, and this on the side, and the extrude, whatever, we'll go with this, and whatever, we'll put the floor on the back as well. And I get something like this. A lot of these settings are self-explanatory, and you can kind of play around with them at your own leisure, but they're pretty interesting. But the real part that I wanted to show is the transform controls. So by default, it's not actually added to it. You have to add it. So you go to component, you go 3D, and add this character text transform. So if I enable location, I get this progress slider, which is basically a quick way to animate this, right? So we can change our distance. If I were to change this to like 200, for example, this is the distance that the text is going to move on the x-axis, and I can animate it with this slider. The order by default goes right to left, but you can change it like to center and do some different types of effects. The range is how much of it moves at one time. So if I set it all the way to 0, it's going to go like letter by letter. And if it's somewhere in the middle, you know, you're going to get more of this like kind of cascading. It won't quite be done before the next one starts. So really, really cool. Makes animating text a lot easier. Same controls exist for scale. So you can scale up from 0 or, you know, kind of same thing, same type of controls, except you get a big begin and end here. With location, it's assuming like where you are is going to be the final point that it is. And same thing with rotation, you can get this kind of effect. And these can all be combined and they can all be keyframed and accessed on the sequencer timeline. So something else that's kind of handy that might be interesting depending on what you're doing is, let me just delete this actor here and I'll select this one. So I added these to the timeline and you can see that I've keyframed them and that's what's actually driving the animation. But on this one, I actually added a separate component here for certain letters. So I could actually change the material of just one letter if I really wanted to here. So the way that that works, and I'll just clear this out, is after you've added your text component down here, if you go to add track, you'll add the static mesh component of the letter that you want to affect. So in this case, I added static mesh component 0. And then when you do that, you have this, you will add the track and you add which material you want to affect. So the face, the bevel, the side, or the back, whichever one matches what you're going to do. So in this case, I have the face, so I could apply this funky glitch material to say like the first 2 letters of this and kind of animate and play around with it that way. So just a little handy thing there that may not be obvious right away when working with 3D text. A few general tips when working in the sequencer area. If you're down in the sequencer area and you control middle mouse scroll, you will be able to zoom in and out on your work area. If you hit the home key, it will reframe the work area. The up arrow will put your playhead at the beginning, and space will play and pause somewhat as you would likely expect. Your camera cuts may look slightly different. If you right click and go to thumbnails and you have draw thumbnails enabled, it makes the tracks larger so you can see the thumbnails. I don't particularly like this. I like it to be pretty compact, so I will turn that off typically just to get a little bit more space down here. You can drag these things around. They will snap into place if you have snapping turned on. Generally speaking, keyframes work the same way you would think. There's also a curve editor if you really want to just edit curves manually or do any of that kind of thing. And for the most part, it pretty much works the way you would expect. You can right click at the top, you can add marks, which you can then drag around. And if you right click on them, you can rename them and give them colors and kind of mark areas that you want to have happen, which I think is generally pretty handy as well. If you're navigating around in the viewport and then you want to get back to where your camera was, you can either pick the camera that you want and lock onto it there, clicking on this here, or if you're using a camera cut track, you can lock to the cut track as well. And then when you scroll along, it will follow the camera path, and you can pop out of it, make some edits, do some things, pick a different spot, lock back onto where it is, and pick up where you left off. Then all this works pretty seamlessly. The final piece of the puzzle here is actually rendering an output. In previous versions of Unreal, you would click the little clapper and use the render movie settings. However, in 425, we introduced the movie render queue, which is in Cinematics movie render queue. Here you can add a level sequence. You can add as many as you would like. You can specify a target map if you're using different maps, or you can add the same one over again and use different presets to maybe render out in 2 different types of image sequences. You can specify your output and then specify if you want to render locally or remote. Local will render in the currently open editor session that you have, whereas render remote will spawn a new instance and load the assets from there. This can be helpful if you're using a different map than the one you have loaded, because if you do render local and you're using a different map, it will have to load the map before it can render it. I'm gonna not go over every single setting here, but I wanted to show a few things that I think are useful. So I have one where we have all settings turned on, just so I can go over them quickly and show a few things that you probably want to spend a little more time looking into. The output types are self-explanatory, except now with EXR and with PNG, you can output alpha just by clicking this box. Doing so will prompt you that you need to make a change here. Making this change will require you to recompile shaders. So if you're thinking you want to use alpha channel, this setting here enable to allow alpha through tone mapper and inside your post-process settings, it would be a good idea to turn that on at the beginning of your project so you don't have to recompile tons and tons of assets because you wanted to be able to use this feature. You can output audio as well, but it will come out as a separate file. Same thing with UI. Right now, if you're using UMG widgets, they will come out as a separate file over alpha that you can then recomposite. The main thing you're going to spend most of your time in here probably is these settings, specifically anti-aliasing, camera settings, and possibly high resolution. I'll go over a couple of other quick things. You can still use the burn-in, so you could burn in your movie timecode if you wanted to. You can now add console variables here and have a start and end, so you could say like, okay, after this one finishes, turn off these console variables because maybe you use different variables while you're an editor that you don't want to have on in your render or vice versa. And same thing with game overrides. You can actually override game modes and things like that from inside here, which is pretty handy, especially with texture streaming and these types of settings. In the output setting here, you can actually set a couple of other things. You can override the resolution, the frame rate, you can change your frame padding, and you can set a range if you wanted to. In this case, I have a single frame that I was going to render. And you can also disable the tone curve for linear EXRs, which is pretty handy. The main area in here that this render queue is much nicer in is with anti-aliasing and with motion blur. And so what this allows us to do is actually take in multiple samples and combine them together and kind of have an accumulation of frames so we can get some smoother things. So the main two things to look at here are your spatial sample count and your temporal sample count. There are tool tips that will tell you a bit of what is going on here, and it will definitely give you some warnings if you are trying to do some things that maybe you don't, that it's not designed to do or won't be helpful. So keep an eye down here. If it gives you a warning, it will give you a little example or a little explanation. But the main idea here is that so spatial sample count helps with anti-aliasing, and temporal sample count helps with motion blur. I know that seems kind of counterintuitive since we call it temporal anti-aliasing, but bear with me, it will kind of make sense. So spatial sample count is basically the amount of like kind of jitters or camera samples that it will take to do anti-aliasing. By default, the engine uses, I believe, 8 of these. So if you have this set to a number that is lower than 8, it will tell you down here, traditional TAA uses at least 8. Increase this to maintain the same AA quality that you had. Okay, great. If I have TAA on, however, and if I were to put 10 samples in here, it will also give you another little warning that says, hey, you're actually using more samples than TAA normally would, so you don't really need this, and it may make it blurry. Just good stuff to note in general. I would say turn this to none. You want to override it, and then you're going to adjust these. The temporal sample count is how many frames on either side, or how many samples on either side of the frame it's going to use to calculate motion blur. So if I were to change this to 8, it's going to take 4 samples on either side, depending on what I have set here. If it's frame center, that will be on either side. If it's frame open, it will be on one side. If it's closed, it'll be on the other side. And all this is based off the camera shutter angle. So if I have it 0, it's still going to be like no motion blur. If I have it set to 180, it will be like traditional film. And if I have it at 360, it'll be continuous motion blur. Something to keep in mind though is that these numbers multiply together. So for every spatial sample, for every temporal sample, it will do 10 spatial samples. So you will get 80 samples per frame with this current configuration here. In addition to, I have warm-up counts for rendering and warm-up counts for engine to account for particle systems and also for accumulation. So the thing to note about this is if you want to use warm-up numbers, you need to make sure that stuff exists before the range where you're starting. So if I'm starting at 0, my cameras and the actors and things that I want to be to use this warm up need to exist during that time frame. If they all start at 0, there's still nothing there. So just keep that in mind. That's one thing that kind of tripped me up initially when I was using this. The last section I'll go over is this high resolution setting. This is to set up tiled rendering. So if I say 2 tiles, it's really 2 vertically and 2 horizontally, and then you specify an overlap ratio. So I have one set up here that I actually had already made for like an 8K setting. And so I have 2 tiles with an overlap ratio of 0.1. And this is kind of telling me at the bottom here exactly what's going to happen here. So in my anti-aliasing, I had 8 spatial and 8 temporal. I also have my camera set up, and I'm using 2 tiles horizontally and vertically, so that's 4 total tiles. So it's telling me it's going to render out 4 at this resolution, and there's going to be 32 renders per tick and 256 per frame. Where that's coming from is we get 4 times 8 times 8, and that is going to result in doing 256 renders per frame. This is going to drastically increase render time depending on what your settings are here. So just something to keep an eye on. However, this is exactly what this was designed to do. So I can increase my tile count as my resolution increases. It will require probably some manual messing around with. In general, I would say you still probably don't want to try and go over 4K per tile. There's not really an advantage to doing like hundreds of tiles because it does have to overlap and blend. And it will also give you some additional warnings down here at the bottom about what kinds of effects may or may not work very well using TAA. Using high resolution. The biggest thing to keep in mind here, though, is that this will forcibly override your camera exposure, meaning that even if you did not do this intentionally here and set manual exposure, it will do it for you, which may give you different results than you were thinking. So just be very aware that when you do that, it's literally the same as if you came over and on your exposure you took this and set it to manual, which in this case is going to give me a very different result than I would have thought. To counteract this, you can either set it if you know kind of what you're doing and you're actually going to work with shutter speeds and ISO and stuff like that. Or in this case, I can actually tick this and then turn off this apply physical camera exposure, and it will set it back to pretty much where I had it as if I did not have this set to manual and it was just ticked off, so to speak. So this is going to give me kind of the same result as if it was in manual, and this box is off. So hopefully that makes some sense here, because that was definitely something that kind of came up with me, is that even if I didn't set the camera to a manual or turn this on, like as soon as you enable this, it is going to do it for you. So just keep that in mind and maybe render out a couple test frames just to make sure your exposure is correct before rendering out 400 frames with 250 renders per frame, and you realize they're all black. So those are just a couple of things to look at. There's definitely a lot more settings in there, and there's some documentation. As this feature is still under active development, it will definitely change as it moves forward and more things will be added. But I just wanted to give you a general kind of overview of some of the things that are actually in here. And it's just super handy to be able to queue up multiples of these and just say, okay, I want to do, this one, I want to do one single shot of this frame. This one, I want to do, the PNG sequence. This one, I do EXR, and you can kind of A/B and just queue this up and walk away. Or you can have multiple different sequences with different options. Super duper handy if you're rendering out, maybe dozens of these with different text options. Hopefully walking through this project has given you a better idea of the relevant tools for creating motion graphics inside Unreal Engine for television production. If you have additional questions, please head over to unrealengine.com and check out the documentation. There's a lot more information about video playback, 3D text, sequencer, and the new movie render queue. Thank you, and we can't wait to see what you create.